All right, it's Monday morning, and on this edition of Wally Pippen Bob Harris, the second edition, we brought in a ringer, and well, he doesn't work for the ringer, but he works for Fantasy Life. It's Dwain McFarland, and Dwain, listen, Bob's betting that he's going to keep his job because he knows that he's pretty much betting that you and I can't do a quick hitting show. Feel it or fuck it.
Oh yeah, definitely feeling that one. In fact, I think I sent you a DM over the weekend saying there's no way we're getting through a list of 20 people. Like, you're insane. I think the most we've ever talked about is like maybe 7 or 8 guys in one show. So I think Bob's onto something there.
He probably is, but fuck him. We're gonna give it a try. So, so let's start. Feel it or fuck it, Dwain. Tet McMillan is a future primary wide receiver in the NFL.
Yeah, I'm feeling that one. I really do think so. Like, look, this wide receiver class is not as strong as last year, but that's comparing to a really good class. But when I look at Tet McMillan, he grades out right in that same range as like a Drake London for me, Matt, in the rookie supermodel. Rome Odunze's right there in that range as well. So I think he's going to be a guy that will be, I don't know if he's going to be a superstar in the league, but I think he's going to be a good starting wide receiver for an NFL team. If you look at the hit rates on the rookie supermodel for guys that grade out in his range, they have a really good chance of becoming top 12 performers in fantasy football over the course of their first 3 years. So I feel good about him. I think low end for him, like, is he just a possession, like wide receiver 2 kind of guy? He could also be that, right? That's in his range of outcomes, but I think he has top 12 in that range as well.
So I would say I'm feeling the possession receiver thing, because the thing that I'm kind of saying fuck him being a primary receiver right now is that I did not feel good about his ability to separate against tight man coverage. I didn't feel good about his route running in the vein of what you look for from a primary receiver. But I certainly see how he could be in an offense where he gets a Drake London type of love, where he could be that big slot type of guy who also plays.
It could come down to his
outside.
Quarterback.
Yeah.
Too. Like, does he have a quarterback that's willing to, hey, I'm not open, but I'm open. Throw it to me.
Yeah.
If he plays to someone like Derek Carr that wants you to be wide open before he throws it,
yeah.
and like that's the only way he's getting to you in the progression, like that could hurt McMillan.
Yeah, or one of our favorite guests who won an RSP this past couple of weeks, his nickname for Kirk Cousins was Bologna Sandwich, because no matter how you dress it up, it's still a bologna sandwich. So that's all. I think if he gets stuck with a bologna sandwich, we might be in trouble. How about Travis Hunter? Feel or fuck that he's an early round draft killer for fantasy GMs?
Man, I think you have to feel this one too, just because like there's such a huge unknown of he's gonna play cornerback, right? I mean, we know he's gonna play, but how much? I think there's still outs for him though. What if he doesn't do well at cornerback, or what if he's good to play both positions, or what if on the outside chance, like he does land with one of the teams that value him more as a wide receiver? He would have been the top graded wide receiver in the class in the rookie supermodel. Like if you just looked at like his adjusted production, which accounts for like where you went to school, your quality of your teammates that you're having to vie for targets with, your quarterback you're playing with, all those things. Like, he graded out pretty good in that aspect of the model, but he was absolutely elite when he had the ball in his hands. So one of the things that the model looks at is really the rating, the quarterback rating, right, when targeting the different wide receivers. So we want to know like how they play in the context of their team, but then also give them a little bit of credit. So, but hey, when they did get the ball, like what did they do with it? And that was an area where he absolutely, shined. I know that Matt Harmon also likes him a lot, says he's one of the best prospects that he's graded from a route running perspective. So always going to listen to Mr. Matt Harmon. So I'm really curious to see where you're at on it. I think there's a wide range of outcomes. If he was dedicated to playing wide receiver, he would probably be like, I've been doing the supermodel, dates all the way back to 2018, because that's when I have the advanced data that goes into the model. He would be a top 5 prospect, all time in the model if he was playing wide receiver full time. Without that, I think it does make it risky.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because Matt and I were talking offline, and he basically said, he was saying the same thing. He goes, what are you doing with Travis Hunter this year from an RSP standpoint? Are you including him as a normal wide receiver? And I was like, yeah, but probably warning people that he's a better cornerback. But I haven't gotten to the point where I've really refined everything yet, for April. And and he's like, yeah, he said the whole Hunter thing's probably moot because I'm sure he'll play defense, but I think he's an incredible receiver. So he had that was the same thing he said to me over this weekend. And I said, he sure made Shedeur look reasonable. That's for sure. And great playmaker, absolutely great playmaker. And we're going to see him have big weeks probably as a part-time receiver. I just don't think, I think he's too good as a cornerback that I don't know if a team's going to do it. But that's the tough part, is if you got to gamble before you know his landing spot and know what the team intends to do, it could blow up in your face. It could be one of those deals where you're like, oh, great.
What's your cutoff, though, Matt, of where you basically get to in a rookie draft and you're like, screw it, I'm just taking him for the talent. I don't know which way it's going to go, but like, what other kind of names are you getting to in a rookie draft? And we can keep it to wide receivers if you want, to where you're like, I'm just going to go with Travis Hunter. Like, this other guy might get to play, but he's just not near as good.
I'd take him above Tet McMillan.
Oh, well, then see, you're taking him right away. Then.
How
low do you have Tet McMillan?
Pretty low.
A
little lower than most, honestly.
Yeah,
but
like a lot lower.
Yeah, I mean, I've got. But see, here's the thing. I feel like, and we're gonna get to this. We'll get to this now. Fuck it. I think that this wide receiver class is going to be one of those things where, how people got upside down in their mortgages? I think they're going to get upside down with picking wide receivers this year. That this is going to be that class where, Hunter's going to wind up playing defense, and then the guys who are at the top of this class are going to be meh to maybe not so good. And and then next thing you know, it's going to be the guys that they took a chance on in the 4th, 5th round and going, oh, that guy was better than the guy I picked in the 1st round, or that guy picked. I'm glad I picked running backs early, which, obviously we have a good class with that. But I'm a little worried about this class overall. I mean, the guys I like right now, and maybe that'll change as we look at the combine and refine some things. Some of the guys I like on this class are mostly people that will go, who? Well,
you're always good at finding those guys, so I always pay attention to when you name them.
Yeah, well, we'll find out, but we'll find out how it goes. But it's an interesting class from that standpoint. So on that note, continue with this class, and we'll round it out with a couple more. Is Isaiah Bond? Is he a better fantasy prospect than his teammate Matthew Golden?
Look, I'm going to say F it on this one. Sorry. I'm trying to be better with my language. I got a daughter here at home. So Isaiah Bond, I'm saying below Matthew Golden. Not that she's ever going to listen to this show, Matt. Sorry. But I should just say fuck it. So, I mean, Isaiah Bond, I've got him below Matthew Golden. There's just not a ton the model likes about Bond. Now, remember, the model is taking into account who he had to play with. Now, he was at Alabama before coming over to Texas, so it's giving him credit for the guys he's had to play with. He's had some tough target competition, so that does help him a little bit in the model. But overall, when you look at him, as far as his adjusted production, he comes in at the 36th percentile in the model going back to 2018. If you look at his ability as far as when he's got the ball in his hand, so like I was talking about earlier, the career quarterback rating on the targets for that wide receiver, 102.4. That's 49th percentile. That's okay. You guys got to understand the way the model works. The highest score over the range is the 100th percentile, right? And so I'm looking at this over the course of players' careers. So sometimes you have a really high score that can skew things a little bit, but Bond's right there in the middle. If you look at him, Lance Zierlein does like him, and that's my scouting input because I can't steal yours and put it in my model, because then I would be taking your paywall stuff and putting it over here. But Lance puts his grades out for free over on NFL.com. They go back a long way, and he's actually been pretty good. His correlations to future success are pretty solid for Mr. Zierlein. So he's got him. He likes him. He's got him at a 6.33 grade, which is 61st percentile. So that also does help Bond in the model. But Golden is kind of similar. He was a transfer as well, actually played with Tank Dell his freshman season in Houston. Then he ends up transferring over to Texas, has to compete with Bond, has to compete with Helm as well. And he did really well, though, when he got his opportunities. And that helps push him up in the model. And I'll say that's something in the past with the model when these guys haven't had great adjusted production. whenever they've done really well, like when they've had the ball in their hands, it's helped catch these kind of players. Guys that didn't score well, like in just production, were George Pickens, but he did great, right, as far as when he had his opportunities. Terry McLaurin is a guy that, a lot of us missed on, but he did really well in this other department. So for me, I have Golden above. But certainly, like, would defer to you. You've been watching these guys a lot more. Like I said, film is an input, and Zierlein does really like the guy.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll just add the thing I love about George Pickens is that when it was snowing outside here and my dog wouldn't go outside, I said, "Are you going to be like George Pickens?" And he immediately decided it was time to go outside. So he was going to man up. So, but I say, "You're going to be George Pickens, or are you going to be Nick Chubb?" You can either be the Georgia guy who's going to run in the snow or the Georgia guy who's going to make excuses about the snow. So anyway, I like Golden better than Bond too. I'd say fuck that, but it's close. I think Bond, from what I saw with his game, I think he has a little bit more going on with his game than maybe what Texas used him as. Because if you look at him from Texas and Alabama a little bit, more often than not, he's kind of seen as that deep threat, that after the catch guy, kind of used in that way. But I think there's, in the isolated instances where I've watched him perform with the techniques that you need to see to be an all-around receiver, I think there's a little more in the tank with his game than what he's used as. So he's closer to Matthew Golden than I expected. And, Matthew Golden to me is probably going to be one of the top 5 receivers on this board. And I think he's probably one of the safer ones in terms of like what he does well that translates to the NFL.
When you get recruited to Alabama, that's always a positive as well. In my model, that there's a program quality component. And so basically what it does, it goes back and looks at the power index for the team over the course of years. Now I have to do it for the years they're at the programs because everybody transfers like 27 times now.
Yeah.
So I had to really make an adjustment to the model in the last 2 years. But yeah, that's also helping him that you're at Alabama. And then when you do transfer, you go to a program playing for national titles in Texas. So obviously very talented player. Typically these teams that are playing for championships, they've got really good players on their team.
Yeah, it's like, you look at Jalen Waddle in college and you think, oh, he might be going down the Henry Ruggs track. And I think some of us wish that he got like a good dose of Henry Ruggs in the way that they would deploy him, but they haven't at Miami. He, because of Tyreek. I mean, that's almost like people are, almost have signs out in front of the jail saying free Jalen Waddle from his.
Well, and
game.
Jalen just has got to stay healthy.
Yes.
He just, and it's not always long-term injuries, but it's just dinged up all the time, leaving games all the time. And then I think that lingers for multiple weeks at a time. But I think he's a very good player.
Yeah, for sure. Guy Savion Williams, TCU. He's underrated. Feeling that?
I'm not. I'm going to say F it. He could be underrated. It kind of, how these things go, Matt. Like, what's your definition, of underrated? Right now, mock drafts have him going in round 3, pick 80-ish. So I would say that's probably about right, based on what the model says about him. And again, the model's looking at the program quality, their adjusted production, and then it's looking at the NFL.com grades, among a couple of other things. I try to keep it pretty straightforward and simple. But when you look at Savion Williams, when I look at his adjusted career receiving yards per team attempt, and that's the main production stat I'm using, it was 19th percentile. And that does include adjusting for age, how well he did. And so you get more credit for doing better when you're younger in the model, but I'm only following the data. The data shows that the better you do, the younger you are, the better chance you have of really being good, at the next level. So Savion Williams, after adjusting for all those things, so that worries me, 19th percentile. And if you see someone like that, typically what I at least want to see is someone that was really played well above that, or had a score well above the 50th percentile whenever you talk about their rating when targeted by their quarterback for their career. And he's at the 55th percentile, which isn't bad, but when you pair it with that 19th, it's not ideal. So right now in the pre-draft model, that's no draft capital included, he comes out at the 51st percentile. And there have been guys that have been productive at the next level, right? Not saying these are stylistic comps, but Terry McLaurin came in that range. Josh Palmer came in that range. Amon-Ra St. Brown was like above that range, but he didn't grade out as a really great prospect in the model either. So there's definitely been hits like that come from that range. And then once you add in his draft capital, he does get a little bit of a bump because third round is at least decent.
I think what's great for people listening to this show and that I'm feeling is that you get a chance to, when you listen to what Dwain just had to say about everything from a model perspective on a guy like Savion Williams, and then you hear that I'm going to say, fuck yes, he's underrated, but it's just probably it. But when you look at the priority of positions that you're going to be picking first, that the third round is probably where you can get him, and be thankful for that, is that you can, instead of looking at it as like, oh, Dwain and Matt disagree on the player, look at it as more of a, okay, is this a potential opportunity? Because I'm not going to be telling you to draft this guy in the first round when you got all these running backs and maybe a chance at a quarterback or two, and then you know where his ADP is going to be. But looking at his tape, if you look at him at TCU and you say program and you go Quentin Johnston and Jalen Reagor, and you want to vomit a little bit in your mouth, you realize that Savion
the
Williams,
model actually gives him credit for that as being a good thing, because at least those players were getting drafted.
See, there you go. There you go.
So, I mean, it actually gives him, some positive for that.
For sure. So, but I would say as a guy, he catches the ball well. He is a good pass catcher who makes tough plays.
He's not Quentin Johnston.
He is not Quentin Johnston. He's more like Cordero Patterson with the ability to learn the game and implement it as a wide receiver. And I think that could be a really nice thing. I mean, like all those players that you mentioned, the one that got my attention obviously was Amon-Ra St. Brown, but the guys that he's stylistically like, he's bigger than all the other guys that you mentioned too. Very good athlete. I think he's the guy that if I'm looking and I'm going, I'm just going to take other positions and I'm going to ease back and okay, third round, I might. He's in that range. Can I wait another half a round maybe to get him? He might be the guy that I scoop up and go, I feel like I got one of the better receivers.
Where does he rank for you? Like, just I know you're still early view, and like the model's not final either. I still have other inputs to work through. But I have him 15.
Okay, so where I have
probably
him
ahead of that.
Yeah, not much further. He's like 12th, but
okay,
the
same
score.
range.
Yeah, but I would say this: the score for me is what's important, and the score is an 81.4 right now, which for me means this is a guy who can contribute early and develop into a starter. And that may change with the combine. He may actually be a little higher because I underestimate athletic ability until the combine, and I see.
Yeah, me too. Every score I see, I basically I add time to 40s. I shave times off of, or I shave things off of like huge vertical leaps and stuff like that.
It's funny.
I'm with you.
I think we're both optimists in life, but we're pessimists when it comes to this shit. Like we're a little more like, okay, let's just.
I've just seen it so many times now.
Exactly. So all right. Move on to running backs.
Yeah.
TreVeyon Henderson is an analytics-minded analyst's wet dream.
Man,
you're not used to these shows.
I feel like if you're saying wet dream, I should have to say fuck it. But I feel like it's like obligatory. I would say it's middle of the road. Like, I'm not allowed to say that though on this show. I really have to say.
No, you can. You can be nuanced. It's okay.
So what you just said a second ago is so important. Like I took you to the rank, which what's funny about that is that's kind of what I harp on with so many people. And I love that other people are doing the work, but me, I want to see the proof. That's why I love your work. I know you've got a process. You grade the players. And ultimately for the supermodels the same way. Like you could have a guy that ranks 4th one year that has a grade of 80, and the next year I could have a guy graded 83 that ranks 9th. The guy that grades 83 is like the better prospect, right? Based on the model. And when you look at TreVeyon Henderson, he's one of these guys. I see a ton of people like probably pumping up too much, but the model does like him. He grades out as the number 3 prospect for me in the model this year. Actually, like once you put the draft capital in, he's probably going to come in Actually, without the draft capital, he's second. Once you put in his projected draft capital, he drops to third behind Omarion Hampton. But when you look at TreVeyon, like, again, he's getting credit for the fact that he played at Ohio State, right? They had other good running backs there, so he's in a good program. It's giving him credit for having to play against earn time against other talented players in the scheme. And whenever you look at him, he's more of a traits-based kind of guy, though. It's not like he's necessarily been this huge producer at Ohio State. He's been a steady producer. If you look at where he comes out, like just from like for running backs, I'm using their adjusted yards per team attempt, which takes receiving yards times 2, right? They're worth twice as much as what the rushing yards are worth. And again, guys, I'm trying to help you win at fantasy. And at fantasy, if you play in PPR leagues, half PPR leagues, receptions are just worth more than carries. So that's why the model is accounting for that, and why you get a better signal with it when you're looking towards the future as far as this production goes. But like if you look at his career adjusted production index, and this also takes into account strength of schedule, all this stuff I talked about with wide receivers, it's 62nd percentile. He grades that as a 62, which is solid. Like, it's not great. But then you look at what he did as far as like his PFF grade, which combines receiving and rushing as well. This is more the qualitative aspect. He comes in at the 66th percentile, so also good, not great. Then you look at the grade that he gets from Lance Zierlein, and it comes out in the 54th percentile, the 6.38. So not great, but good. So he grades out as good across multiple things. He's coming from a really talented program, and he's probably going to get good draft capital, and he's probably going to run well at the combine. Like we've seen it on tape. He looks really fast. I'm like you. I've got him as a 4.45 right now, but it wouldn't surprise me if he runs a little bit under that at the combine. So TreVeyon Henderson is a guy that does a lot of things well. And if he comes out and runs better than that, and he goes higher, in the draft, he's going to move up. He could potentially be as high as number 2, in the rookie supermodel. So I do like TreVeyon Henderson.
Yeah, I like him. I don't love him.
I don't love him. Yeah, I'm with you. I don't love him.
Yeah. And with this class, he could be, I don't think it's going to happen, but at this class for me, he could be as low as 18th on my board among running backs. I don't think it's going to be that low. He could be as high as probably 4th or 5th on my board for that. So it's not far away in range from where you're talking either. I kind of look at him, if I were going to just simplify it, I'd say he's kind of a little better than what people thought. Or he's better than DeAndre Swift, but he's and could have the role DeAndre had. So if you're playing fantasy and you're just thinking from the fantasy standpoint of how things go, Dwayne nailed DeAndre Swift in terms of here's how he can be helpful to you. And don't worry about whether or not he needs directions to the hole. That you're going to get him in space, and that's where that's going to matter the most. And if you give him a good offensive line, he's going to do just fine. And I think with TreVeyon Henderson, when the play's straightforward and he can run the play as designed between the tackles, he's good. He's competent at what he does. Good enough to be in the NFL because of the traits you mentioned. Get him in space, he's much better than, he's very good.
Does he kind of go back to Tevin Coleman for you? Because I remember that you used to talk about the athleticism and everything that Coleman had, but just if he wasn't running like a gap play, if you're asking him to run zone and have a feel, it became, more problematic for him. Sounds like, though, you might like TreVeyon better in space, because I think there were issues with Tevin Coleman as well, kind of getting out over his skis versus what you have with TreVeyon. I would say that's true. I would say that there's some similarities there from that respect. I think that TreVeyon, when he has to cut between the tackles and make cuts that he has to kind of react to a defender, he has difficulty maintaining his balance, difficulty knowing what tool to use in his toolbox. So, yeah, some of that's there. But the receiving end of the game, running plays as designed, I see him in that range of player where I think he could be at the top of this archetype. But you would say if Jerick McKinnon's at the bottom of this range that I'm going to isolate of the archetype, DeAndre Swift is higher up than that, I would put Henderson above DeAndre Swift in that range. It just depends on whether or not NFL teams are going to mistake him for an every down back the way that they have with Swift. And we've seen data that kind of even this year showing that, he's not really the back that they want him to be. But boy, I'm happy for him because he seems to be getting gigs left and right
because of what he can do. But they keep trying to have him do things that he can't.
Fortunately plays in an age of the NFL where you've got coaches that are more flexible to helping you, putting you in positions to do what you're really good at. We've seen that with Achan in Miami. We've seen some of these coaches just understand, like, hey, these guys are better in gap schemes, power schemes versus zone. It's not, you're going to have to be able to do both to some extent, but you do see it. And they were even doing that with Jalen Wright last year in Miami. So I do think that, the landing spot, could be a big deal for TreVeyon, but he has that home run ability that teams really do covet because he can flip a game on a run play, which most running backs just can't do, right? You really got to go to the pass game to flip the game, and he does have that ability.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, you combine the desire for speed and the factor that draft capital, means money spent, and that you've got to make good on that investment, then, guys who might be better than him sitting on the bench that I get frustrated with just as a pure talent watcher, I look at and go, yeah, it's too bad that there is an open competition here. But I'm with you that he's good enough, and that's the important part. All right, so how about Damien Martinez? He's the safest back in this class, not named Ashton Jonty.
F that. I'm very excited to hear you tell me why. I'm sure you'll shift my view. Again, like Lance Zierlein has him at a 6.18. That's a potential, like, eventual starter, at a minimum, a really good backup in the league. So
right.
I think he has a similar sentiment to you. That is in the model, so it's helping him. But right now, like, his current draft capital is round 5.
Right.
Like, so he's going to have to go before that. That's going to be a problem if he goes that late. And it is a deep class. So you could see some backs get pushed down the board. Overall, again, like, looking at his production, it was pretty good, 49th percentile after adjusting for all those things we've mentioned before. If you look at him from a more of a qualitative standpoint, from a grading perspective, 55th percentile for PFF. And then if you look at, like I said, for Lance Zierlein, coming in right there at the 46th percentile. But again, remember, 6.2 being a 6.18 is a decent grade for running back. If you go look at Lance's grades historically, not great, but it's fine. So he's another back, kind of similar to TreVeyon. And it goes back to what you mentioned earlier. You mentioned the range, like how wide it could be on TreVeyon for you. I've got a lot of backs in this class that have that same sort of range, where it is going to come down to some of the testing and the draft capital as to where they end up landing in the model. But it's not because they're all that far apart. There's a really big group of guys that are all close together. I'm not as high on this class overall as what some folks are. I'm seeing people throw around the word elite. To me, the word elite, like the bar has been set. You got to look at 2017, where you get a Christian McCaffrey, a Joe Mixon, a Leonard Fournette, an Alvin Kamara. That's
Aaron
an elite
Jones
class.
In the 5th
Aaron
round.
Jones. You had late round picks that hit in a huge way. You hit on your early round picks. That was a monster class. I think this is a good class. And the reason it is good, you've got Genty at the top. So you have your superstar, right? It's in that Bijan range. And then you have the next group down. There's a bunch of them. And Damien Martinez could be in that mix. Right now, he's just on the other side of it. Typically in the pre-draft model, you want to be at the 60th percentile, but he's at the 55th, which, again, it's close enough. Like, he really could easily be in that group above. So some of these things are going to come down to these last few data points that I've still got to get into the model. So I could easily see, like, how Damien Martinez has this path to being a good player. Like, he's got the size a lot of teams are going to want. I think it is going to be important for him to run at, a decent time. Right now, I've got him at a 4.640. For 232 pounds, that's still okay, right? Like, his speed score is going to be okay, but he can't run slower than that.
Yeah. No, I think Damien Martinez is that guy who we could be looking at 8 years from now and going, he's still in the league and playing as a top 12 back. Like,
I think there's several of those, actually, guys that could last in the league.
Yeah.
Will they have huge roles or not? Some of that comes down to chance, right?
Yeah.
Where they land, competition, all that.
And I agree with you that this is not an elite running back class. I think it's a good running back class with a lot of guys who could have a year or two. It may not even be consecutive years where they have fantasy value. So it could be a very frustrating class, depending on landing spot and how they start and what their draft capital is. But Damien Martinez, to me, is a guy, he breaks tackles, he gets yards after contact. He is a good pass catcher on leak routes and screen routes, and he's the type of guy that if he can stay healthy, gives you that James Conner type of vibe where he can do a lot more than what you would expect. I think if he has a good day, if he has a good weekend at the combine, he could move up for sure. So
yeah, I agree with that too.
Yeah, speaking of guys who you hoped would have dominated for years, but then just kind of fell off pretty quickly, Le'Veon Bell. And you think about Le'Veon Bell's running style. He was a guy that very patient, allowed to just kind of wait and see what was going to happen and then make moves. Do you think that running style would be a barrier to entry to start in the NFL today?
No, I would say F that. I again, though, I do think it comes down to where you land.
Yeah.
And I think, the fact that the coaches are willing to, try to put you in position to succeed, I would like to think that there would still be coaching staffs that would want to do that. Now, there are also scenarios where that goes the opposite way. Rachaad White, stylistically, is a similar runner to Le'Veon Bell. Not as good as Le'Veon Bell, but similar, right? He wants to wait behind the line. It's almost like a punt return, right? Instead of a kick return. It's the difference between those two things. I want to lay back, let the first person commit, then I'm going to go to the other hole. And, offensive line can also make that problematic. Like you need an offensive line that can work with.
Yeah.
And Le'Veon Bell was excellent at that. But for Rachaad White, like it literally – basically, it got him benched because there was a guy behind him that was willing to just hit the hole they wanted in Bucky Irving. And so I think it really would come down to, the landing spot. But I like to think at the right spot, Le'Veon Bell would have still been good. And the other thing, he was just such a plus in the receiving game, so he just had so much utility. The more utility a player has, and you talk about this as breadth, right, and depth of talent. So I think about that breadth, right? What are all the different things you can do? And then the depth is, okay, how good are you, right, at all those different things? And I think Le'Veon was just, good at a lot of things. I don't know that he was elite at any one thing, but he was so good at a lot of things, a jack of all trades. And he also landed with a coach that is just willing to stick with one back.
Yeah.
Like, Mike Tomlin for years was willing to, if you gave him something, he was willing to stick with you. And so we got 4 or 5 really good years out of Le'Veon, and that helped him.
I finally realized as a Browns fan that I've pinpointed in recent years the Steelers' greatest weakness. And if you're going to point it to, like, if we haven't been single for a long time, but dating, from a dating perspective, you would probably say sometimes you just you have a bad picker about something. I think that the Steelers' bad picker is with offensive coordinators. I think that's probably because
I think you're right.
When it comes out in the Pittsburgh Courier a few weeks ago that after Russell Wilson lit up the Bengals, that Arthur Smith basically told him to stop changing plays into good plays because his ego was too attached to his offensive game plan. I mean, they're fucking screwed. They're not as screwed as Cleveland, but it's just like we're, it's going to be like
screwed for a different
if
reason. They're screwed for a reason that should be very fixable, right? Cleveland has some things right now that are not fixable. They put the quarterback contract and things like that.
They've thrown themselves into a hole with spikes. The Steelers are just like digging holes for themselves, and it's just like the fact that the Browns and the Steelers have to look at the Bengals and look up at the Bengals is just like a scary thing that both Browns fans and Steelers fans can agree upon. All right. So if I were to tell you that there was a back as good as Le'Veon Bell in this class, would you believe it?
Well, we're going to go ahead and exclude Genty because obviously I think we're on the same page. Genty's great. So it has to be someone below him.
Yep.
And do I need to try to make a pick of who I think it would be?
You don't need to, but if you want to, that would be fun. We can give you 3 chances and then we can move on.
Okay, 3 chances for Le'Veon Bell. One would be Quinshon Judkins.
Nope, but I like him.
All right, Cameron Scatterbo.
Hell no.
and so this is the difference of how Matt and I look at these players, guys. I look to see, okay, show me the players that were good receivers in college out of the backfield and then also took on a significant workload as rushers, right, and graded well in some of these other categories. And to be clear, my model doesn't go back far enough to see Le'Veon Bell, so I can't, filter and cheat here to try to click on players.
You can see that.
What about Devin Neal?
I like him too, but no. I'm going
to – all right, 0 for 3.
That's all right, because I was going to shock you. It's Taj Brooks out of Texas Tech. Taj Brooks when you watch Taj Brooks, he's a very good receiver. He's that guy who can win downfield, at least when they surprise you. You know, he's not going to beat people one-on-one in the NFL, but he is a guy that can go downfield and catch routes and and win against tight coverage on, wheel routes and things like that. He's a very good outlet receiver. And my nickname for him is Lemonade Stand, because this dude can literally take lemons in the backfield and turn them into lemonade. I think he literally paid for his scholarship basically running a lemonade stand in that backfield, because he had so many potential negative plays that he turned into positive outcomes. Like if you took the McFarland kid from Maryland who was playing in Pittsburgh, Anthony McFarland, Anthony McFarland's stat line on the same plays that I would project Taj Brooks' stat line to be, Anthony McFarland's stat line would be like 5 for -15, or like, let's say 10 for 5 with a number of negative runs, where with Taj Brooks, if he had 10 carries, he'd probably have like 55 yards. And
so PFF run grade really also did like Taj Brooks, 72nd percentile, for his career. And, that's one of the things that I know PFF grades are not perfect.
Sure.
But I love that they actually take the context, right? Yeah. If all the offensive linemen miss the block and then you make someone miss, that's a positive event for you, which I think we all agree, should be true.
Yeah.
Now, the scale you think you might want to use for that, I think people would look at it differently. Basically, that's a plus 0.5, and the best you can get is a plus 2.0 or 2.5 on any play. It gets capped. So Taj Brooks did grade out well there. My one concern with him as a comp, and what I would like to hear from you just a little bit more, because what's holding him down in the model, as far as being anywhere close to what I would imagine Le'Veon Bell would have done in the model, is really his ability as a receiver. Now, we do see this at times. I will acquiesce and say there are times where we have guys that are actually good receivers in college. We just don't know it.
Yeah.
They're not used that way. Now, we also have a lot of guys that were not used as receivers in college, and they never get used that way in the NFL. So it can break both ways. But like Taj Brooks, that's the big thing. Like his best season as far as receiving yards per team pass attempt after adjusting for everything is 22nd percentile. So that holds him down.
Yeah. Like I have him right now as a guy who has got a borderline grade between committee level and starter level as a receiver, which I only have 7 players, 7 running backs at the starter level right now. So the fact that he's on the verge of that's pretty good. I would say, I'm not concerned about him as a receiver, because that's what I kind of led off with him, is that he's is that he can catch. He catches and tracks the ball very well. He can do it after contact, and because he's so good at making the first man or 2 or 3 miss, or because he's either going to make you miss or he's going to run through you, and because he's a 230 pound back. My biggest concern is how explosive is he? Like I have a feeling from the short area quickness perspective, why I gave him the Le'Veon Bell comparison is that when I watched Le'Veon Bell, I remember seeing, wow, this dude is so freaking quick. And then when you looked at his 3-cone drill at the combine, it was elite. At that, in terms of what he could do.
His tackles forced per attempt, 0.27. The NCAA average is 0.21. So he definitely graded out well as far as being able to elude defenders.
Yeah. So if that quickness shows up, I think that he's someone that could be a surprise with the right landing spot. You're not going to be taking him top 10. He might be graded in my top 10. Hell, he might be graded in my top 5. Honestly,
this episode will get him drafted in my Dynasty League. You guys don't know how much people listen to Matt so much in my Dynasty League, and so that's the one thing I don't like doing why I don't like doing these shows. I always want to do them because I love Matt, but everyone listens to this crap, and then there's no way I'm getting Taj Brooks.
Well, I figure.
He'll go 3 rounds too early now.
I do the same thing. I do it to myself too. I mean, in leagues, and then there's also I play in leagues that I really want to win, and then I find out that they listen to your work.
Well, they do it to me too. So they take your picks and my picks, and then so I'm left with literally I'm like having to scrap through nothing.
Yeah, welcome.
Anyway,
welcome. The water is a little cool, but yeah, I mean, I like him. I think that he's an interesting back. And at the very worst case scenario, we can just start to saying that maybe I have a penchant for running backs named Brooks, because I like that Oklahoma kid named Brooks. I like Chris Brooks. And now we've got Taj Brooks. And I like Jonathan Brooks too. So, yeah, if your name's Brooks and you play running back, there's probably a good chance that I'm going to have a good score for you.
I got a cousin named Brooks. First name, though. I'll introduce you guys.
Okay, that sounds good. I'll buy him a beer. Omarion Hampton, good, but overhyped?
I think that's fair. Like, he's going to come out as the second or third back in the class unless, like, he really drops, like, in draft capital for me. But Again, it's because I see Genty as being the star, and then I have a bunch of guys I like, but I'm not super confident any of them are going to be stars. And I do think there is a segment of our industry, and they can end up being right, and I can end up being wrong, that really are positioning more as a star, right? We have several guys that's happening to right now in this class. And so when you look at him in the model, I will say there are definitely positives here for him. And this is one of the guys I have had a chance to watch film on. Guys, I talk down about my film watching ability. I've learned a lot from Matt through the years. I actually do, track stuff. I actually, am like ticking boxes and writing down notes. But I'm also humble enough to know, like, I don't do this all the time, and I don't have the process that you have, Matt. So I like leaning into people like you guys. But I will say it's fun to watch him run. When he gets to the second level, it's like a loose freight train. He doesn't always have control, but man, it's going to hurt if you're the defender that has to deal with getting this man on the ground. I kind of worry, like, is he going to be able to hold up? Like, he is so violent as a runner. It's fun to watch, but I worry a little bit. But like, as far as the model goes, like, looking at him, he gets dinged a little bit. Strength of schedule came in at 56th percentile. His program quality at North Carolina was 49th percentile. So that dings him versus a guy like TreVeyon Henderson, even though they grade out similarly in the model. Like, if you look at his production score, it came out as a grade of 48, right, out of 0 to 100. So really more middle of the road. But if you start to look at some of the qualitative stuff, like his PFF run grade came out at the 77th percentile. If you look at his total grade, receiving and rushing for PFF, 63rd percentile. And then you look at what we've got from Lance Zierlein, he gave him a 6.33. So again, another one of these guys that has a lot of things that are pretty good about him. No, like, elite trait that you hang your hat on. Like, obviously when you watch him, you can see he could be a battering ram, and he runs with power. But across the board, like, he does get above, like, the thresholds I care about the most for all these things. So he does grade up pretty well. He gets above the 60th percentile in the pre-draft model. And if you go back historically for guys that get over that, they have a really good chance of succeeding. To your point, it may not be a long career, but they're going to have a hit or two along the way. And it may not be in back-to-back years. But he also has a chance, like, to be a guy that could be top 12. There are some guys that fall in that group. I believe, I don't have it in front of me right now, I believe 13% of the guys that have graded out in his category have gone on to become a top 6 performer in fantasy in their first 3 seasons. So there's a chance, but more likely a running back too.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I think he's a B back who could be an A back if called upon. I don't know if I would put him on par with David Montgomery, who I think people said was way overhyped, but I think has proven that maybe he was worth the hype. Maybe he's, maybe not.
He was another guy that checked a lot of boxes pretty well, but nothing elite.
Yeah, exactly. So I think Omarion Hampton is somewhere between Jamal Williams and David Montgomery. And I'd say that that's pretty good description of what you just said in terms of a player. So, yeah, I think he's good, but the idea that he's making this running back class great, I don't think he's the argument that you want to stake with that. Though there are some people I feel like are gonna rail against that because they're the fans of him are huge fans.
He was kind of the hot thing about 2 weeks ago. You know how it works in our space, and now it's Caleb Johnson. So, like, people will bounce around from these guys throughout the process. Hampton was the guy I was hearing about all the time on social media like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I had somebody criticize me because they felt like my tone of voice about describing a play was not excited enough for what he did. So It was fucking 3:30 in the morning when I made the video, Dwayne, and my eyes were bleary, but
Don't
that's
you know
okay.
you're only here on this earth to entertain other people, Matt? Come on. That's your only purpose.
Unintentionally, yes, but intentionally, I'm not sure. Brashard Smith and Dylan Sampson, are these McFarland favorites in the out in space vein of like guys who can make things work along the lines of HN and maybe even Swift on the lower end of that scale?
Dylan Sampson is for sure. Smith, I'm not as high on, but Sampson, he's a guy that he comes in he gets a 64 in the pre-draft capital model. And just so folks like to give you kind of an idea, like draft pick is a 0.58 correlation to future success in the NFL. The model without draft capital at this point, like looking back at how it's done historically, is a 0.70 correlation, right? Now, once we put them together and we know the landing spot, we know the player, or the landing spot doesn't necessarily matter in the model. It does matter as far as where they go in the draft. It moves up to 0.75. So it gets better, with draft capital. But he grades out in a range. He's that 64, and I talked about being over the threshold of 60, and it's not an exact thing, but that's just basically the line of demarcation. If you look back historically, if you're over a 60, doesn't mean a guy at a 58 can't be just as good, but just to help people understand, like Sampson's above that, right? And so he looks really good. He grades out as the number 5 prospect without draft capital. He moves to 7 when I put in his current expected draft capital, which is around pick 100 in the draft. Now, he's a smaller player, so there's going to be some teams that just aren't going to want to take him early, Matt. I mean, he's 190. He's going to have to run fast at the combine because that's going to also impact his draft capital. But, man, he graded out really well. Like, if you look at his PFF run and receiving grade together, comes in at the 69th percentile. So, like, when he's got the ball in his hands, like, that's kind of the thing. He's been really good. If you look at him, 16% of his carries went for 10-plus yards. In college, that's well over the college average of 13%, so an explosive back. The main concern with him would be size, but he does grade out better in the model than what current estimations of NFL draft capital, which I'm just using NFL mock draft database. Like, so
Sure.
Nothing perfect, but it's basically going out and aggregating, right, and pulling all the results from all these mock drafts out there. It's the best thing we have right now. So I'm higher on Sampson than market sentiment. I would say that.
I'm higher on Sampson than market sentiment as well, and I'm higher than him on Brashard Smith, who I also like. But I'm also higher on Dylan Sampson than I was on Jalen Wright, his predecessor. I think he's a better back.
Me too.
Yeah.
He comes in, actually, he grades out quite a bit better than Jalen Wright did last year.
Yeah. I think he's in the conversation with guys like Martinez and Johnson and Hampton and Judkins in terms of like players who could have an impact early on in their career on some level. Size is going to be a big deal because 190 is fairly small. Can he get to 200, and can he be as devastating at 200? If he is, then that's great. But
or can he just be super smart and be fine at like 195? There's backs that have done that. Like Jahmyr Gibbs is doing it,
sure,
right now in that range. Jamal Charles did it in that range. So I think some of it is fit. Like, can you get in an offense where you can play that way, and then like you know your strengths, and like you play to them. You don't have to take all the big hits.
Now, the guy who reminds me of Jamal Charles a little bit is Brashard Smith.
Oh, nice.
A little bit of that. I think that's who I mentioned with it. I might have that confused with somebody else, and that somebody else is Ashton Jeanty. Actually, Jeanty was the guy who reminded me of Jamal Charles. But Smith has a little bit of that in him, and he's still learning how to play the position. And the fact that he's made strides this fast from his final year at Miami to his first year as a starter at SMU, I'm very impressed with what he can do. And I think that he has room to get better in terms of his decision making. And I think that the fact that he's come along this fast is good. So here's the thing. We are 48 minutes in, okay?
Yeah, see, Bob knew.
but and we've only done half of this right now. So
Rapid fire.
Fuck Bob Harris on this. We're going to get at least to 15 because his over under was 18. My over under was 18. And he said you're going to go way under that. But but Dwayne's ignorance is to our benefit on this because he hasn't watched quarterbacks yet. So we're going to rapid fire quarterbacks right now. I'm just going to give you some early thoughts on some players, Dwayne. First of all,
I get to ask you now if you're going to feel it or fuck it.
Well, you could, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, Will Howard, Matt, feel it or F it.
Fuck it. I think he's a Josh Allen starter kit, but he's got directions for Paxton Lynch and Kyle Trask for assembly. In terms of that. I mean, like big, strong, certainly someone who can move pretty well, but I just don't think that he quite sees the field at a level that he needs to. But he's going to get that early look because the NFL is down on guys who they're. As one of my friends said, who I can't name by name, but as well, Dwayne. He basically said to me, there's at least half the league that still follows the rule that if they're big, white, kind of doughy faced, and can and throw the ball with good arm strength and big, they think that they can fill them with the qualities that they never actually get filled up with. I
think those are the prerequisites, and they can fill around all the rest.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, and it's probably the opposite. All right, on to the next one. And this one is for our friend Brian Drake. Why is Brian Drake going to be so pissed off, Matt, after you talk about Kyle McCord?
It isn't just the Pittsburgh game where he threw like multiple interceptions. Because after watching the NC State game, which was the first game I watched, where he had like I think 5 throws that to me were very much interceptable throws. I then was joking with another friend of mine, Alex, who I always talk about on this show. And Alex was like, okay, I said, I'm about to watch the Pitt game where the box score is even worse. But you know how the box score can be misleading. He goes, yeah, because it could have just been receivers who tipped passes and they were accurate, that kind of thing. I said, yeah, so what do you want? What do you think the over-under should be on interceptable passes? And he said, should it be 5? I said, I think it should be 7 based on what I saw in the NC State game. He ended up having 9 interceptable passes in that game. And then watching other games, it wasn't that much better. Like, he's a guy that he doubles down on. He's awful in the red zone and in the black zone in terms of decision making. He's going to look at the guy. He's like Anakin Skywalker who's on the bottom, and Obi-Wan Kenobi's on the hill, and he's like, I've got the higher ground, and Kyle McCord is like, fuck you, I'm still gonna beat you, and then he winds up in a pit of lava. So yeah, I think that this is Kyle McCord's fatal flaw, and I don't think it's gonna get better.
All right, a name that's steaming right now, Matt. Steaming up draft boards. We've got Jaxson Dart. Is this big draft media's overhyped poster boy? Are you feeling it or are you effing it?
If he winds up in a short passing game and they give him play action and get him out on an island and a real runway to throw the ball, or they Carson Wentz him and they ask him not to have to do much with his footwork and let him throw between 25 to 30 yards as his deep passes, then I'm feeling it. But otherwise, it's steaming for other reasons because his deep game is a stealing. Anything over 30 yards is a steaming pile of you know what. I mean, I think I've watched charted 25 plays over 30 yards, and it ain't good. Like you can watch.
He would be good at the game of darts, but probably not like javelin throwing, like is what you're saying. Like,
yeah,
his last name is Dart.
You want a javelin thrower? Get Javelin Milroe. Because that guy...
Oh, look at this transition.
Yeah. This guy, I got a little bit in me. This guy is certainly that guy looks like he's throwing a javelin. He's got such a compact release, and he's I think more accurate than people realize, and he is a much better pocket player than people realize. If you just forget you have to remind yourself every time you watch this game, this is not Nick Saban's Alabama offensive line. This is not Nick Saban's Alabama offensive line. Nick Saban would probably like just have a complete conniption fit if he had this offensive line, for this team. I mean, they were that bad. But I like him. The hand size is an issue for people, and I want to ask
How
you
much
this,
do you
Dwayne.
worry about hand size?
Not a fucking bit, because it's
me neither.
8 3/4. It's always a quarter of an inch lower than Joe Burrow's hand size. Are we really, and it's not, he has a lot of fumbles, Milroe does, but that's because he's got Auburn off defensive ends and linebackers teeing off on him at will, and everybody else teeing off him on will. On the backside, most of his fumbles are like blindside hits and hits under pressure while he's bringing the ball back to throw, that maybe if you were Ben Roethlisberger or Steve McNair back in the day, maybe you'd hold on to some of those opportunities. But no, I think that the fumbles are not having to do with his hand size. They just have to do with the caliber of his offensive line.
All right.
So we're
done with quarterbacks. We're
Yep.
done with hand size talk.
Yeah.
Now what? You want to talk tight ends now?
Yeah,
Is
I think
that
we
what
can.
we've got
I
left
think
here?
we can do it. I think we can do it. We're at 50.
I think we're going to get all 20.
I
and
think we are
we'll
too.
Stay rapid fire.
Yeah. All right. Tyler Warren, Jason Morrow repeating itself.
Man, I can't go that far. I have to say F that. But I will say this. He did grade out in the pre-draft model, and there is a 0.71 correlation to future fantasy production without draft capital in the model. I'm pretty proud of that. Like, I mean, I get it. It's
that's
still
a good
equal
number.
draft capital, basically. So it's like, we could have just used draft capital. Yes, you could. But to have a model that can actually be as good as, something like that, I'm pretty excited about. And draft capital is obviously always huge for the reasons we talk about. You get more chances, right? They're invested in you. But he graded out as the third best tight end prospect in the class. Colston Loveland was above him. Even Harold Fannin Jr. was above him. Now, I know there's some concerns about what will Harold Fannin Jr. Do as far as size and all those things. But when you look at Tyler Warren, a couple things real quick that the model didn't like about him. Number one, all of his production came in year 5. Like, historically, that is not ideal. That's not to say that we shouldn't give him credit for the year he had. Just realize it gets a lower weight in the model. You get more weight for doing those sort of things in year 2 and 3, which is what Colston Loveland did. All right. I get it. There were good tight ends playing at Penn State, but he's already getting credit for that too, guys. Like, that's why program quality comes in, and I look at target competition and playing time competition.
You mean that Jets tight end that hasn't seen the field, who ended up at Old
Yeah, but
Dominion?
still, he got drafted.
Okay.
Theo Johnson as well.
Okay.
So it gives him some credit that he at least is behind guys that were drafted in the NFL, right?
Sure.
So it's giving him a bump up for that, because that's the first thing people will say. Well, he played behind Theo Johnson. I'm like, well, A, do you really love Theo Johnson, or do you just think Theo Johnson's the guy that drafted in round 4? And yes, okay, we're already giving him credit for that. But when he had the ball in his hands over the course of his career, 125.2 quarterback rating on those targets, that's 79th percentile. So, and I think that kind of matches up with what I've seen a lot. I haven't watched a ton of him yet, but what I've heard people talk about when they watch him. It's like, hey, if you can get him in space, use him on drags, do these different sort of things, like, he's got some ability. After the catch, you can move him around. He even had I think 30 rushing attempts in college. So he's a guy that kind of reminds you of an Aaron Hernandez in that way, and some things he did with the Patriots. But all that production, came so late, and it does, when you see something like that, what that honestly worries me is if it's someone that really can attack all the different areas of the field, which allows them to really be unlocked in any type of offense, or are they going to have to land in an offense that's just right for them, where these things get schemed. The thing working for him is he probably will be the first tight end off the board, at least based on what, folks are saying right now. But man, he is not anywhere near the tier Brock Bowers was in. So it's just kind of weird. And I know part of it's the draft class to see that he's going to go potentially before where we saw Brock Bowers go in last draft. And I think that is going to deceive people about what the potential ceiling is. Again, Tyler Warren, if he goes 13th overall, like, he's going to be one of the top 5 people in my model, because draft pick matters the most. Okay. But just letting you know, the pre-draft model and why I create it is so you can then compare those two things and say, where might the model be saying, not so sure about that. We're going to give him credit because we know he's going to get his chances. And I'm totally not doing rapid fire right now, but screw it. Screw you, Bob Harris. That's what I have to say about Tyler Warren. I like him, but I don't think he's this elite prospect that folks are saying.
Yeah, if Tyler Warren's Brock Bowers or George Kittle, I'm John Coltrane. That's all I got to say about that. No, Jace Amaro is a bad comparison, because really,
Yeah, you got mean with that. That was just like
Amaro
mean.
can't catch. Amaro had issues catching the ball, but he's a good athlete. I would say it's kind of the reverse. Warren is a strong athlete. He's kind of stiff. Like if I were scouting him like up close, I would want to have a workout with him where I actually see him extend for a football, because he can extend, but he looks like either it's the pads he's got on that makes him look like that he's doing like T-Rex hands when he's catching balls, and he can't fully extend, but he can catch the football. Like he's a guy that does go up and get it. You're going to need to have a lot of deception to get him up the seam. I think he's got some. I wouldn't be surprised if his acceleration score is pretty good, but his long speed is not there. Like I know he has a reading of 19.5 miles per hour. I saw that one play where he got to that, and that was like almost an anomaly to the other plays that he had where he had opportunities to reach that speed and wasn't anywhere close. He's not that great of a blocker either. Like he's a short yardage quarterback, who you can use on short plays. But like, I don't know, Penn State tight ends, to me, the best one in recent years has been Pat Freiermuth, and he's underutilized. And but I would say I'd take Pat Freiermuth like 10 times out of 10 days a week, basically, if I could, over this kid. And Pat Freiermuth wasn't picked that early. So yeah, Harold Fannin, too small.
F that, man. Look, there really is a chance. I agree with folks that it's going to be a landing spot thing. I've just been kind of asking the question out loud. Like, I mean, are we sure? Are we sure? Because, I mean, he's 238 pounds. Brock Bowers was 245. Like, he's pretty close. Trey McBride, 246. A lot of these guys, Dalton Kincaid, Sam Laporta, like, he's in their range. Like, he's off from them, like, by 4 or 5 pounds, not 15. Now, he needs to weigh 238. Right? Like that's what NFL.com has him at right now. So the combine this week, if he comes in at 230, that changes the calculus a little bit, right? Now you're talking about giving up 15 pounds versus those other guys. So obviously we know you've got to have the base to be able to then take on the coaching to say, can you take it to the next level in that department of the game? And, physics are at play. You can't be a super small player and take on defensive ends. Like you're just not going to be able to. So I think that it's a risk. But at the same time, I'm open to being wrong about that with Harold Fannin. And I just think of Matt, when the thinking used to be if a running back's under 200 pounds, he's going to be a bust. I'm not touching him. This is kind of in that range. Like it's close. The other thing is his run blocking grade from PFF, came out like right in the same range as a lot of those same guys that I just talked about.
Not bad.
Yeah. And look, Brett Whitefield from Fantasy Points, like he interacted with me yesterday on Twitter, and he is great. He watches all the film. If you guys don't know who he is, go check him out on Twitter. He does great work for Fantasy Points over with Scott Barrett, and he talked about alignment's really huge for him because he rarely is lining up to take on that defensive end. So like they're getting him in where he can have an angle to go after a linebacker or a second level defender. And when you're getting graded on those things, right, you're not getting extra credit for blocking a defensive end. You're just getting the grade for doing the job you were assigned on the play. So I think there could be something to that. But again, I'm just trying to be open to it. And the main reason why, Matt, is because he graded out in the 100th percentile. He has a grade of 100 in his adjusted production score, which again accounts for the strength of schedule. It's dinging him for playing in the MAC. It accounts for the quarterback he plays with, accounts for the teammates that he played with. So with all those things factored in, like he still has the best production score we've ever seen for a tight end in the model. And again, not a huge sample, guys. We're back to 2018. The model's still fairly young. But that impresses me. And then if you look at him when he had the ball in his hands, the quarterback rating when targeting Fannin Jr. Was a 125. That's in the 79th percentile. You're gonna grade really high in the model when you get those things. And then he got a solid grade from Zero Line at 6.23. So checking a lot of boxes for me, but he is going to need to weigh 238. He can't come out and run slow. Those things would hurt him. Athleticism doesn't hardly factor at all in my model for wide receivers. It's a little bit for running backs. Tight end is actually where it matters the most. It still doesn't outweigh the things I just told you about, but athleticism has mattered for the tight end position more than the others.
I love his footwork. I think that he's a good player in terms of after the catch. He really understands how to run the football. They use him a lot on smash screens where you have to have good vision, and he has that. He has good lateral agility and can flip his hips and cut back and press creases and cut back and find lanes. So he's very good as one of those players you can put in space or use on RPOs and screens and things like that. And he can block in that type of vein for sure, as a detached option. And you can use him on the wing or at fullback and do some versatile things with him. I think he catches the ball reasonably well when he is facing the ball, tracking the ball over his shoulder, and he's wide open, or he's open, makes the catch, and then takes a hit. Like, when that happens, he's fine. Like, I think that all works out well. I watched him last night, and I watched 6 opportunities.
I saw you posting a lot of stuff on Twitter about him last night.
Yeah, I saw 6 opportunities where they were tight coverage. Like, literally the guy's on him, and he didn't catch a single one. And
he went Jared Cook.
Yeah, and when he drops passes, it's because he clap attacks targets. So he's got a little bit of some lapses with clap attacking. The speed element I don't think is going to be there for him, but I think he's quick enough to threaten a seam off of play action. He's quick enough to get you yards after and he can get yards after contact. So I think there's a potential place for him, but we're going to have to see just how quick he is. And whether you can get a little bit more, even get maybe a little more explosive. So
the worry is, right, he lands in that, hybrid kind of role, where it's
James
more
Casey.
of like James Casey, Chig Okonkwo. Now, he's a much better prospect, like in the model anyway, than those players. Like, he's did some really huge things. So, like, I think you got to keep that in context. But, like, even, again, way better than Juwan Johnson. But you see what happens to him, right? If the game script goes right and they got to throw the ball all the time, Juwan Johnson's out there running 70% routes, getting targets. He does fine in fantasy for you. If it's a game where it's close or they're leading and they go to their run game, he's not on the field. And when they audible to the pass, he's still not on the field, right? So it's a problematic issue. And that, I think it is a rightful concern to have it with Harold Fannin. I'm just trying to stay open to, like, hey, maybe he could figure that aspect out, so don't completely write him off. He'll probably end up being my tight end 3, like, after the draft is over. I don't see someone Ty Warren and Colt and Loveland are going to go sooner in the draft.
Yeah, I've got Loveland higher than Warren and Fannin, but Warren and Fannin are in a range where they have scores right now where I go, okay, they could contribute and maybe even become fantasy contributors in that role that they're put in, And so, yeah, I'm not looking at them as in that range of, you don't look at TJ Hawkinson and say these guys are going to be the next TJ Hawkinson who can do anything you ask them to do. But they certainly could have value. Funny enough, when I said we only had 10, we actually had 12 because we talked about 2 other things. So we only have 2 left, and we're only 6 minutes over, which I would say is pretty good for us.
I would say that's excellent for us.
Yeah, I mean, oh my God!
If I was grading that in the supermodel scale, that would be like a 95 for us.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe a 100.
If you adjusted it to normal podcast, we'd probably be at a 27. But that's okay. We don't have ads. We don't have any of that shit. All we got to say is that you should check out Dwayne's Supermodel over at Fantasy Life, and the great work that he does and the podcasts that he has, and what Dwayne brings to this table. He's one of the best in the industry. I admire all the work that he does, and it's always a pleasure for him to be able to come join us on this show and come have hometown week over here, because he's always got a spot here at the RSP, whether he if the world just collapsed on him. But we don't think the world's collapsing on Dwain McFarland here. But the RSP, listen, you know what it is, you know where to get it, mattwaldman.com. 28 years, we're in year 20, and I look every bit of it right now. But that's okay. So we're looking forward to doing, getting the pre-draft out April 1st. We'll have a post-draft out within a week of the NFL draft. If you don't know anything about it, you can go to mattwaldman.com and learn, appreciate that. So we're going to round out with a couple of questions here. The last one, we'll just sum up the tight end class. Is it better for the NFL than fantasy GMs?
Well, here's what I would say about that. I think you have to feel it, because that can happen with any tight end class. Tight ends are just difficult, right? And again, a lot of it comes down to what do the coaches think about the player as far as their ability to stay on the field and be an inline option, right? And you just talked about maybe Ty Warren might not be that. Colson Loveland may also not be able to do all that. We don't know, and it can take them time to get acclimated and get moving. Now, Sam Laporta wasn't necessarily a great blocker, and he plays all the time. Yeah. So it comes down to landing spot really is big. For the most part, I'm a much bigger believer in talent than landing spot, but I do believe with tight end, it matters more, and it does take them longer to develop. And you know what happens, Matt, when it takes you a longer time to develop at something, what does that leave the door open for? Coaching change, GM change, all these things the player can't control. They might actually be on their normal trajectory. Like people are, and I know you weren't huge on Michael Mayer. He graded out pretty well in the model, but people are already giving up on Michael Mayer.
Yeah, they shouldn't do that.
He wasn't great as a rookie. And then he had Brock Bowers on his team the next year, and he had personal issues where he had to step away from the team, and people have already completely written him off. We don't even know if Michael Mayer's good or not yet. He might actually still be good.
Michael Mayer could very well have the same role as David Njoku and be better at the role that they've asked David Njoku to be in. That's how I don't even and you know I don't love Mayer, but that to me, that tells you what he could be fantasy wise.
It's tough. Dalton Kincaid faces the same situation, right? They won't play him full time. It's not that he's not a good player, but the way the Bills want to use him, it's not necessarily working out.
He's the magic man to Josh Allen's Ricky Bobby. Ricky Bobby just won't let the magic man win.
Yeah. Isaiah Likely lands behind Mark Andrews. It's like, what are you going to do? So, yeah, look, I think you have to feel it on the question, which is, it could be better for the NFL than for fantasy GMs. But I honestly feel like you almost have to feel that way about every tight end class. Now, recent classes have to have you encouraged because the NFL is a copycat league. They see Sam Laporta come in, not necessarily be a great run blocker, and they keep him on the field, and that's a team that likes to run the football, and he's done well. And then you look over at what happened last year with Brock Bowers. This is not a 260-pound tight end out there. Yeah. Brock Bowers is functional as a blocker, but it's not like he's out there pancaking guys. So it does leave the door open for more coaches to be like, okay, maybe I do care a little bit more about their ability as a pass receiver than as a blocker. So I think those doors are open. I think this is a very good tight end class. Like if I was grading wide receivers, I think it's average to below average. Running backs, I think, is good, right? So or slightly above average, not elite though. Yeah. And then for tight end, I would say the class could be good to great just from a talent perspective and where they're probably going to go in the draft. Now, it does really matter. Like it's such a huge factor, like what's going to happen on the teams they land on. It's bigger than really the other positions.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer. So we're going to end it this way, Dwayne. You're going to give an underrated player a few people are talking about, and then I'm going to give you the choice. You can either piss off your league mates or you can piss off this audience. And you can either let me use Taj Brooks as my underrated player and piss off your league mates that they're not getting another, or you can piss off everybody else and have me talk about
No, I want you to do another, and I want you to go first, because I gotta look here. It's gotta be a good one, I gotta think about it for a second. So you go first.
Okay. So I've got a couple of receivers that I think are the reason why I think people are going to be upside down in this group. And I think I'm going to give you the most underrated one that will likely be probably have the least reason from after the combine. If he has a great combine, I'll be pleasantly happy for him. But I think Kanade Mumfield out of Decula, Georgia here down the road, out of Pitt. He's 6'1", 185. I think he might be the best pure pass catcher in this draft. As I've joked for many years that if I win the Powerball and I can buy an island and I name it RSP Island and I have the NBA's equivalent of the slam dunk contest for the NFL and call it the Brandon Lloyd Acrobatic Catch Invitational, sponsored by the RSP, and I would probably say Kanade Mumfield this year would have been a dark horse to win the college divisions version of this contest. Very good route runner, someone who can efficiently tell a story on defensive backs with excellent technique. He really knows how to set up stems and set up breaks. He's a savvy route runner. I just don't know if he's a 4-5 or a 4-5-5 guy or a 4-6 guy. And if he's a 4-6 guy, that's kind of a death knell. If he's 4-5 or 4-5-5, he might be okay as kind of a slot possession, slot or outside possession guy, and might have a chance to be a little bit more Marvin Jones Jr. like, an old RSP favorite type of player who could have a long career and have some years where he's really strong. But his footwork's great, his quickness is great. It doesn't show up after the catch. It only shows up with his routes. So I'm a little concerned about that, but he's the guy that I would look at and say that there's 3 receivers that I feel that way about, and I would say Kanade Mumfield is actually the lowest graded of the 3.
All right. So again, I just put all this data together over the last few weeks. I have not written up all these players, and that's really when all this information gets ingrained into my brain.
You and me both, dude. I got an entire month coming up where that's about to happen.
Yeah, and a lot of my time is spent honestly testing new things and new ideas, most of which never make it into the model. They end up just being a go down a rabbit hole that provides nothing.
Are they behind those double doors, or are they in the piano bench?
Yeah, in the piano bench.
Okay.
They're in the piano bench. No one looks in the piano bench. So Jaden Higgins is one that I would go with. And look, he's projected to be a 3rd rounder, so it's not like this guy is like a real sleeper, but he was close to that 60th percentile that I talk about. In the model, in his pre-draft, he got over it. He's at a 61. So that means that the model in the pre-draft version actually likes him more than what NFL Draft Capital likes him right now. So that's kind of what I glanced through. What are the guys where the model pre-draft likes him more than what the Draft Capital says? So when you look at him from a standpoint of his career production, he's another one of these players where it wasn't elite, but it was really good. 62nd percentile, guys, is like a good grade in this thing. And then you look at what he did once he had the ball in his hands, and he also did well in that category. And then you look at the film grade from Zierlein, he came out in the 56th percentile. So he's one of these guys that checks all the boxes as meeting, the thresholds, not way exceeding them, but he's doing well enough across all of them. He was the guy that started off at Eastern Kentucky, transferred over to Iowa State. He is a 4-year player, so he's not an early declarer or anything. And that pushes players down board sometimes for folks. But I would say that it's Jaden Higgins. If I had to pick one that was deeper, and I'm not going to go into all of it, but a guy that barely missed this kind of line of being at that 60th percentile or better would be Xavier Restrepo from Miami. You can say I've not even watched 1 ounce of film of this player. I'm not even sure if I announced his name, I said his name right.
You did fine.
Okay, so Xavier Restrepo. I feel like it's strep throat or something, but anyway, he comes out just below. Now it does look like he spent a lot of time in the slot, so I don't know if his game translates to the outside, but the underlying numbers do look pretty good, and the model does account for where they align if they're getting to play mostly slot or outside. So it does account for that already.
Nice. Look, it's always a pleasure getting to catch up with Dwain McFarland. You can find him at Fantasy Life. You know where to find us here. And Bob, we love you. Bye.
We love you, Bob.
Say it now.
Yeah, so just real quick, Supermodel will be dropping the Monday after the Combine. So I'll get all the data entered for tight ends on Friday, wide receivers and stuff over the weekend, Saturday, Sunday. And the model will actually drop. And then the write-ups will follow. Running back will be that first week. Then I'll hit wide receivers, and then I'll hit tight ends where I'll do the full write-ups. Find it all over at fantasylife.com.
Beautiful.